This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Are you a professional pillow fighter? Or a 9-to-5 low-cost time travel agent? Or maybe real estate sales on Mars is your profession? It doesn't matter. Whatever it is you do, however complex or intricate, Monday.com can help you organize, orchestrate, and make it more efficient. Monday.com is the one centralized platform for everything work-related. And with Monday.com, work is just easier. Monday.com, for whatever you run. Go to Monday.com to learn more.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot. We charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale and today I'm absolutely over the moon to be greeting Adam Woodward, who is the editor of Little White Lies and has written a book called The Worlds of Wes Anderson, a beautiful book, by the way, the influences and inspiration behind the iconic films, to give it its full subtitle. Hi Adam, thank you for joining me.
Hi John, it's delighted to be on. Can I just pick you up on one very small thing? I'm editor at large, not editor.
Oh, right, editor at large.
Sorry about that. Only because I'll be told off if this goes out and I'm claiming to be editor.
What does editor at large mean?
Editor at large is I'm just less involved in the kind of day-to-day side of things these days. So my role is kind of more, I suppose, strategic, and I work across like partnerships, and I help out with the podcast and run our YouTube channel and other things. But it's a title I've made up myself, if you can tell. So it's kind of a bit more loosey goosey.
Okay, that's great. I mean, Little White Lies, you were there from the very get-go, right?
Almost. I've been there for long time now, since about 2009. So when I started, it was print magazine, obviously, and predominantly that was its focus, I suppose. I mean, it was, there was a website, but it was a kind of very fairly rudimentary website at the time, and I came on at a time when they were looking for someone to sort of set up the website properly. So that was kind of my main remit for the first sort of 10 years. As I say, I've moved into sort of more of a oversight kind of role now, but as I say, working less on the day-to-day side of things, so slightly out of the loop with the goings on in the film world and the film scene, but still very much kind of active in my own way.
How did you first get into sort of writing about films? What was your in?
I suppose my in really was, I mean, I studied journalism and a sort of bit of a Frankenstein course of film and media and other things at Cardiff University, and I was quite involved with the Student Union newspaper and magazine there. Edited the film section for a couple of years, and actually we quite brazenly ripped off Little White Lies. I used to buy the magazine. I used to go to Borders, if you remember that shop, that chain that was quite a good kind of magazine and bookshop. And you always used to pick up the new issues there. And yeah, I just like loved the magazine, and that was kind of, really just hit my sweet spot in terms of my passions at the time. And I used to actually write to the then editor and just send him clippings and things, probably pestering him a bit, but managed to just sort of get my foot in the door out of university on an internship and never left.
Excellent. And I mean, I remember Little White Lies was sort of part of a ballooning of sort of film criticism in that
Mm.
period. There were a lot of sadly now defunct or going about to go defunct, if that's not too pessimistic. But Little White Lies as seems to have grown and grown with the as the years have gone on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because having been there as long as I have now, I've got this kind of I can kind of look back and remember not so fondly the time when everyone was saying print is dead, and social media was quite a kind of small thing really in the kind of publishing world back then. I mean, it sounds kind of strange to say it now, but obviously there was no TikTok. No one was really doing anything on a platform like YouTube or even Instagram. Twitter was a thing, but again, it was very, very different to what it is now. But I think we've maintained that kind of core audience, I suppose, around the print magazine because of, the passion we have for it. The business model, to be honest, has kind of shifted a little bit. So, we aren't just making the magazine. We do other things across the company which supplements the magazine and vice versa. So, it's and again, a lot of with what I do is a lot of it is like brand related. So it's kind of working on partnerships and sponsorship packages. Not to get into too deep into the weeds with it, but that's kind of how we've kind of I suppose ridden those trends and that, as I say, the print is dead and the pivot to video and all these things that we've kind of kept going with the magazine. And obviously we have all these other things as well now, like I mentioned, the YouTube channel and the podcast. And yeah, so I think it's always found its audience, and I think ultimately it's because it's quite a premium product. It's a really, beautifully put together thing, and it has, for my money, some of the best writing on film around. So I think that will always find its audience.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't want to sort of stretch the linkage too much, but that idea of sort of curated quality, aesthetically pleasing, leads us directly to Wes Anderson, I think. And
Totally, yeah.
I'm imagining the French Dispatch as being a kind of the offices of Little White Lies, a sort of diorama of people working in very
Yeah. Well, no,
symmetrical.
you're not too far off. I mean, Davey, our editor is not too dissimilar, I think, in some ways to. I mean, he's someone who kind of came through. He's slightly older than me, but he came through magazine journalism school, as it were, and did shifts at Time Out. And he was actually involved in the very, very early days of Little White Lies, as a contributor. So I think that core team being there has kind of put it in good stead. And the Wes connection is an interesting one because the first ever issue of Little White Lies was Life Aquatic in 2005. So
Right.
there's always been, and I think we've had 3 or 4 of his films on the cover over the years. So there's always been that connection to him there, and he's someone I've always as I say in the introduction to the book, kind of pre-working in film and being at Little White Lies. I was a long-term fan of Wes and his work. So it's nice that we've been able to, I suppose, intersect over the years with the magazine and his kind of work and follow his career.
Your first film at the cinema for with Wes Anderson was, I think you say in the introduction, was The Royal Tenenbaums, right? What was
Yeah.
what was that first impact then? Had you already seen Rushmore on videotape, or was that something you would do later?
No, I think that came later. To be honest, it's a very vague memory, and I don't think it was a kind of eureka moment for me. I think it was something that I probably only with the kind of passing with time have realized the impact of it. I think at the time I suspect I enjoyed it and maybe hadn't quite seen anything like that. I think that was probably the time when I was getting more into, independent American cinema, especially. Rushmore, I think I then rented on DVD subsequently. Obviously that was a kind of previous film of his, but I think Rushmore was the one that maybe had a bigger impact in terms of understanding who Wes is as a filmmaker. And I think my connection to that was more was more instant. Even watching it after Royal Tenenbaums, renting it, watching it, I probably watched it a few times. I don't know. I don't know about you. I mean, I lived down the road from me. There was an old school kind of video rental shop I used to go to quite often, and I'd rent usually like 2 or 3 films at a time, and I'd watch them all a couple of times because you'd get them for like 24 hours or 48 hours or something. So I was in the habit of doing that. So I probably watched Rushmore a couple of times in a row. And actually, Royal Tenenbaums is one that I enjoyed a lot more revisiting it now for this book because I hadn't seen it in a few years, and it was always one that I kind of felt like I hadn't connected quite with. And I think beyond that point, I'd pretty much seen all of his films as they'd come out, And that is just one I hadn't revisited very often. And for this, it was that was a bit more eye-opening, I think, realizing how good it is.
I think it's a really interesting point that we're at now with Wes Anderson because people have. I would say you're a bit younger than me, but even of this generation, I still perpetually see Wes Anderson as a kind of young new generation filmmaker, and of course he kind of isn't anymore. He's in his middle age now, quite solidly.
Yeah. His films are all on Disney Plus and other things, and he's kind of, not to say that he's a sort of big mainstream filmmaker in a lot of ways. I mean, I think he will still be unknown to a lot of people. He's not a household name necessarily. But having said that, I think he's someone who's always managed to operate, even within the kind of Hollywood system. He's always managed to operate on his own terms, and I think that is, the mark of a true artist and a filmmaker like Wes, who can kind of not so much reinvent himself, but keep, I suppose, building on the work that he's done. I mean, if you kind of look at his volume of work now over, what is it, 30 years, something like that, it's amazing how consistent he's been as a filmmaker, but also how he's evolved and how he's changed and how he's kind of, I say in the introduction again, he's always exploring, he's always taking influences from different things, which I go into detail in the book. I think you could really see this arc if you kind of track it over time of as I say, how he's kind of developed and where his interests lie. And I don't think he's ever, it's kind of an interesting thing because I think he's often accused of being, there's a certain aesthetic and there's a certain style and tonal association that people have with him, but I actually think he's never repeated himself. He's never made the same film twice. I think actually, yes, there's a certain mode of filmmaking that he operates with, but I think he's someone who constantly surprises you. I mean, his most recent film at the time of recording, obviously Asteroid City, is, I think, his most mature. And I mean that on a kind of storytelling, emotional level. I mean that on like a filmmaking craft level. So that for me is very exciting that he does still feel, as you said, like a relatively young filmmaker, even though he's probably 50 something now. But I feel like the best is still to come from him, to be honest.
And one of the things that I really took from your book, and which surprised me and made me look at, because my history of him is, I remember being sent Royal Tenenbaums when I first arrived in Italy. Someone sent me the DVD, and they described it as this is a comedy without jokes.
Right.
I thought that's an interesting description, and I can kind of see what you mean. It's sort of like it's not got any sort of like punchliney jokes, but it's very funny all the way through. The jokes sort of come more from the situations. And then I followed his career very closely. I think the first time I ever went to Cannes, the opening film was Moonrise Kingdom.
Yeah, I was at that same Cannes. That was my first. I think that might have been my second Cannes, but that was an amazing experience going to see that, and great choice for an opening film, and just I mean, that's one I absolutely love that film. You can probably tell in the book there's a lot of reference to Moonrise Kingdom, and that was a very fond experience. And I think I was at Berlin when Isle of Dogs premiered as well. So yeah, it's been, as I say, it's been nice following that evolution of his and kind of keeping tabs with his career over the years.
And yet, having followed it through the years and being very aware of certain references that are in his career, the book was really revelatory to me in seeing just the depth of some of the influences, and some of the influences being totally ones that I hadn't considered. I mean, I think one of the ones you mentioned, obviously, is of interest to me because of my research, but reference Badlands to Moonrise Kingdom, and it's like, oh wow, I know, that never occurred to me.
With this book, I did want to explore, I suppose, my own interest in film as well, and draw my own connection. So a lot of it is stuff that Wes has talked about, and there are some very obvious references throughout his career and throughout his filmography. And I think you don't need to be a sort of student of film or an academic to spot those, right? They're there. I think what I was interested in was, okay, he's talked about, I mean, Isle of Dogs, which I've just mentioned, in the press conference at Berlin for that, he was talking about Kurosawa. Now he kind of does this. He'll sort of tease that. I really want to kind of give the whole game away and go into a great deal of detail. And these, I suppose, the situations, press conferences, interviews, is maybe not the scope and the time to do that. So that was really my I suppose, the thing I kept coming back to in the book was picking up these little breadcrumb trails and just seeing where I could follow them to. So that was a really interesting lesson, and also where that led on to other things, So you've got Kurosawa, but there's other Japanese directors, peers of his, for example, who Wes has obviously been influenced by. That I think the influence is less apparent, but it's there. And I think, there's a few different ways I could have approached this. I didn't want to exclude the more obvious stuff. So, for example, Fantastic Mr. Fox, obviously it's an adaptation of Roald Dahl, but wanted to look at exactly how that has kind of permeated through not just that film, but other films of Wes as well. There's filmmakers I've completely ignored. There's no mention of like Jacques Tati, for example, although he's clearly been a huge influence on Wes. I mean, this book I could have written probably 4 or 5 times over and come up with a completely different list of films. But yeah, no, I think I had a similar, I suppose, experience to you. I mean, it's great to hear that your response reading it was like that, because that was very much my experience of writing it and researching it was, again, Badlands. I think there's been other writing around that connection, or certainly a few kind of images and comparison things online, but really digging into it and discovering stuff for myself was just an amazing experience, because you kind of, I think you appreciate how skilled a storyteller and a craftsman he is, that he can weave in all these influences and still make it feel like it's his own original thing. It doesn't feel, very rarely does it feel like Wes is just kind of, tipping his hat in a way that a lot of other directors often do. And maybe it's for their own indulgence, or it's a bit of fan service or something else. I think he does it in a way that always services the story that he's trying to tell.
I had a conversation with a guy called Charles Meyer. So I put his name in because I don't want to claim this observation as my own. And he told me, he gave me this really interesting idea, which was Wes Anderson films always work best when there's an anti-Wes Anderson in the film. And his argument was Gene Hackman is sort of like the anti-Wes Anderson, and in Bottle Rocket, James Caan is the anti-Wes Anderson. And I sometimes think that works with the film references as well, that he's using something which is kind of a surprising grain of something of sort of antimatter that will create a sort of reaction. Somebody like Hal Ashby, who you wouldn't immediately think of when you think of Wes Anderson, but it sort of grounds his films in a way that is much more, it becomes very creative. And as you say, it's not just here's a reference, clever me, it's actually something to bounce off.
Yeah, no, totally. And Hal Ashby is an interesting one, because he, in the course of his career, made so many different types of films. Although I think they all have a certain, they all have a certain flavor to them that you can kind of tell it's got his fingerprints on it. It's whether it's like Harold and Maude, or The Last Detail, which are the two that I kind of focus on here, or Being There. Yeah. So I mean, which is a personal. I mean, I absolutely adore Being There, and again, that's probably something I could have included in this book. I think Wes's films often there's a sense of like a journey, and whether that's a physical journey, and you have that quite a lot in films like Life Aquatic, or Bottle Rocket is a bit of a road movie, right? And you've obviously got that in Darjeeling Limited, or you have a more emotional, spiritual quite type of journey. I think a lot of his films, it's not so much a pattern, but they follow a certain there's something there which is a constant, that he returns to, and he's exploring in different ways. And I think Hal Ashby is someone you could say the same thing with. And so I think they're just very simpatico on a kind of, I think as filmmakers, Ashby and Anderson have very, very similar sensibilities and kind of interests about human relationships and the way the world is. And you might not necessarily watch The Last Detail next to, I think I mainly compare it to kind of the Darjeeling Limited. Aesthetically and I suppose narratively, they're very different films, but I think there's a real like spiritual connection there, and I think that's the thing I was most interested in exploring, and hopefully that comes through in the writing more, because obviously the book is very visual. There's a lot of images, side by side stills, and other things, and I think that stuff is fun, right? And it's nice to look at, and hopefully it will kind of spark that reaction that you've said you've had. But I think hopefully the writing adds a bit more to it than that. It's really trying to get into Wes's mindset as a filmmaker and as a person, I suppose.
I totally agree with you about that sort of humanity that the Ashby and Anderson share. That ultimately, when you get through the various sort of societies they're portraying, which are often quite structured, and people people maybe ground down a little by the family or in the case of Last Detail, the Navy, there's a humanity that needs to come forth. And I mean, one of the most surprising comparisons I had, again with the Darjeeling Limited, was Cassavetes' Husbands, which I would never in a million years have put Cassavetes and Wes Anderson together. And then once you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, of course, they're three guys. They're brothers rather than friends, but they've all been to a funeral. They're all wearing black, and they're all going somewhere else in the immediate post. I found that a really interesting connection.
Yeah, and I think that's one he's a funny one, Wes, because he's quite almost he can come across, I think, as quite flippant in terms of his own, I suppose, cinephilia and his own interest in certain filmmakers. And I think there's interviews where he talks about, I think it's even in the production notes for the film for Darjeeling Limited, where he's talking about him and Roman Coppola, who's his long-term screenwriting partner and producing partner. And they're just sort of saying, oh, it's a bit like, Husbands, where there's these three guys, they go on a journey, etc., etc. And you kind of go, oh, that's interesting. And you watch it. And as I did for this book, obviously you watch them again and again, and you kind of sit with scenes for a long time, and you realize, I mean, I guess like you say, in Darjeeling it's more centered around those the sort of funeral scenes, right? Because Darjeeling, you have the flashback to the father's funeral. Here in Husbands, the funeral is early on in the film, and then it all leads from there. But yeah, there's so much, I think, in terms of, as you say, these characters who've been slightly beaten down by the world, and they're dealing with grief, right? I mean, that's what it's about. That's what these films are kind of dealing with. And I think those comparisons are really interesting for the kind of level you can get into with them in terms of the detail. And there's definitely like a visual stuff going on there of, like I say, some of the framing where you've got the three of them sat in the back of the car, all dressed in black. I mean, that is Wes obviously very directly paying homage to Cassavetes, but I think on a more kind of on a level, as you said, it's that kind of level of humanity that he's kind of exploring is definitely ripped from Cassavetes.
I think they're more unpleasant as characters than he usually goes for, certainly at the beginning, and that feels more Cassavetes driven. Than once you notice that link, it's sort of like, aha, okay, that explains that element to me much more than I previously thought.
Yeah, and Darjeeling, obviously, it's a film about a physical, literal journey, and there's always a sense of momentum in Wes's films. I think with Husbands, there's a scene near the beginning which is actually I find quite difficult to watch, where they're kind of getting drunk and they're kind of reminiscing about their friend. It's essentially like The Wake, but it goes on and on and on, and it's quite a kind of ugly scene in a lot of ways. Their behavior and the way their relationship, it's a fundamental scene for understanding these guys and their relationship to each other, and also sets the kind of film up really for the next however long. But
explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos, hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love, an easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head to head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Like you say, it's not inviting you to necessarily even empathize all that much with these characters. It's very just like, here are these people. I think Wes doesn't quite go as far as that, but I totally agree. I think the brothers in Darjeeling are not introduced as like the heroes of the film, really. I mean, they are not people who you instantly are drawn to or particularly would want to, spend time with. I think they all come across as narcissistic and, they're kind of quite childish, they bicker. And it's only over the course of the film, same with Cassavetes, right, that you kind of learn a bit more about why they are the way they are and why they're behaving the way they are. And I think that's testament to Wes's ability and skill as a writer as well, that he can kind of, by the end of the film, you're not necessarily, you haven't completely come 360 on these characters, but you're certainly in a different place with them than you were when the film starts.
I always think about the old Harold Bloom Anxiety of Influence book, where the idea of incorporating your influences, and I mean he was coming from a very Freudian 1960s point of view of sort of like you have to kill your fathers in order to go on. Anderson is working in a sort of context where you've also got direct contemporaries like Quentin Tarantino being very cinephile in there and very referential in their films. I mean, I see that dynamic as quite similar. I don't want to set them up against each other because I don't think that's particularly fruitful, but I see them as quite similar in being able to get over that sort of Bloomian idea of just, I'm going to, consume other people and go on. Primarily because of that thing you said at the beginning that, he's got his own style. He's not making the same film. Or even a film which you can predominantly identify as just this is his X film. I mean, I'll give you a counter example. J.J. Abrams making Super 8 was J.J. Abrams making
his Spielberg movie. Yeah. I mean, so you're sort of saying him and Tarantino,
there's an element where that 90s into the 2000s, late 90s into 2000s sort of period where there were filmmakers who were very much well versed in cinema who were making. I mean, I'd throw in Paul Thomas Anderson maybe as well with Boogie Nights.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, wasn't it? Because I think Tarantino, I suppose maybe this is because he's a more mainstream, more successful filmmaker than Wes, and he kind of hit that cultural moment in the sort of mid-90s and became a real. I mean, how many filmmakers have tried to emulate or imitate Tarantino?
Right.
You haven't had that many do that with Wes. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just because his style is so unique to him, so specific. And you've had a lot of pale imitations of someone like Tarantino. I mean, Tarantino, I think he wears his influences on his sleeve, right? Just like Wes does. And he is someone who has made, I think quite consciously, this whole idea of him mapping out a 10-film career. Every film has been like this is the genre I'm operating in. This is I want to make a kind of revenge Western in the spirit of Leone or whoever it is, or Corbucci. And, that he's kind of done that film by film. And I think with Wes, his influences, I think, even when something like Darjeeling Limited, right, which has a primary influence, which is Satyajit Ray, and again, I discuss that at length in the book. It has that, but it also has all these other influences. It's not just, I'm looking at this one director and this one genre. Where I think Tarantino maybe has done that a bit more in his career. Although he's obviously like a big time cinephile, right, Tarantino, and he loves to talk about that and he loves to show off kind of his kind of cinephilic chops. But I don't know, I think Wes is maybe a little bit more, possibly a bit more self-aware and maybe a bit less egotistical in the way he kind of wants to show off his kind of knowledge like that. I don't know.
He never casts himself in the role of an Australian mine worker. And
exactly.
I think for that we must all be thankful.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, after saying I don't want to pit them against each other, I mean, I would say that some of Django Unchained, particularly Inglourious Basterds to some extent, I always get a feeling I'm watching an essay of a film rather than a film. It's sort of like, here are my quotations and here is my thesis.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that I'm doing that with Wes Anderson. Also, there's another aspect, which is, of course, his literary influences,
Yeah.
which you bring up in the book as well.
Yeah, literary, and I think one thing I did want to touch on in the book is, yes, he's a filmmaker, and I think a lot of his influences are in the same medium, but certainly literary. Looking at the art world, there's a lot of references to painting, photography, music is a big thing, obviously. I think probably maybe after Tarantino, I'd say Wes is the person who is probably most associated with that jukebox soundtrack and using kind of popular music in that way. Not to sort of sully the term popular music, but you know what I mean. It's that kind of it's and again, that's a Scorsese thing, right? And that's something that Wes has kind of pinched from him a little bit, but he's turned it into his own. He's kind of claimed it as his own. I think that's the interesting thing about Wes and his influences. But yeah, the literary thing. I mean, again, I could have the whole book could have been focused on just that. He has talked about Grand Budapest Hotel, and that is probably the one that is the most directly borrowing from a single source, in this case, Stefan Zweig. I don't know. I love the stories of, Wes will talk about, and I sort of anecdotally cite this in the book, but discovering Stefan Zweig, I think it's The World of Tomorrow, in a bookshop, a secondhand bookshop in Paris, and then just devouring all of his books. And I think that curiosity that he has with different authors, and it's not just the classics. He's not just he's he'll reference someone like J.D. Salinger in certain characters or moments in films, but I think his appetite to kind of go beyond that. He's not just looking at the old masters with painting or the kind of American classics and literature. He's just very he's just so widely read and continues to kind of feed that curiosity and that appetite for discovery that he has. So I think that's something that, again, I hope that comes through in the book, and I hope people read the book and want to go off and watch some of these films that I talk about and discover stuff for themselves, because I think the world is a richer place when we're all kind of approaching it in that way.
Well, you've done a double whammy, because you've made me want to watch more of the films, that some of which I've already seen and some of which I might not have seen so recently, and it makes me want to rewatch the Wes Anderson movies so that I can go back and rediscover them. Also, because I feel it's easy to be sort of a little bit complacent with Wes Anderson and sort of feel like you already know him.
Yeah.
When you don't. He's one of those. He's easy perhaps to pastiche. I mean, you've got these AIs of certain films as if it was a Wes Anderson film, for instance, and that's a bit tedious in itself.
I didn't write this book as a response to that, but that was something I was kind of conscious of. Was it feels to me that and understandably, he is someone who he's quite hot right now, right? His last few films have been quite successful. I think for him, they've been some of his most commercially successful. And he just seems to have hit a moment. I mean, all the TikTok trends and the AI stuff and the Instagram accounts that are sort of, I suppose, offering a bit of a, I think quite a kind of simplistic idea of what his aesthetic is, what his style is. That's all good and well. No. I don't want to kind of seem like I'm dismissing any of that stuff, but I do think if that's your only view of Wes Anderson, then the idea for this book, I guess, is to kind of challenge that a little bit and to open that up and expand that, because I think there's just so much more there. And yes, he's kind of almost ripe for parody, I suppose, in the same way that Tarantino is in how singular his style is and his approach to filmmaking. But yeah, I think it's doing him a disservice to almost reduce it to that and distill it to that. I think there's just so much more there, and it's I think pity the person who only engages with him on that level, to be honest, because I do think he's one of the great contemporary filmmakers and sort of storytellers. So this book is really designed to sell people on that that idea and to get people engaging with him on a slightly more, yeah, just a slightly deeper level, I guess.
Yeah, it's like that sort of internet trend of quoting Miyazaki and sort of making him into this cuddly curmudgeon. And it's like, no, he's kind of, you got to watch the movies. Speaking of which, the Roald Dahl shorts that he did for Netflix, which of course are sort of word for word renderings of the short stories, I thought were some of his best work. I absolutely adored those. I thought they were amazing.
Yeah, really good. I mean, I'm forgetting the name of it now, but the one with Ben Kingsley,
Oh, The Poison, I think it was called.
Poison, yeah, is fantastic. I mean, they're all good. They're these kind of little dioramas of films, aren't they? That he's, I mean, he's just the fact that he can just do that. I mean, it's a shame in a way that they kind of just slipped out on Netflix, and obviously they're still there. But I think his short film work is quite interesting. I don't go into a huge amount of detail about those films in the book, but yeah, I think he is even when he's doing like a commercial short film for like a for H&M or someone, those worlds that he creates feel so rich and so just kind of complete. And I think that is the result of just his, yes, his mastery of his craft, but also his just ability to kind of pull from all these different sources of inspiration and reform it into something that's very cohesive and very convincing and very compelling. Even with the short films, I mean, yes, he's adapting Roald Dahl, but I think there's more to them than that. I mean, I couldn't really they were released at the time when I'd kind of written the book, so what I wasn't really able to go into too much detail with them, but yeah, I think they're great.
And I mean, one other aspect of him I'd like to highlight is it's just sort of his internationalism. You know, I think he was slightly unfairly criticized for Isle of Dogs for cultural appropriation, but I mean, personally, I think cultural appropriation is just an inevitable part of culture. You know, I think that's
Sure.
kind of what culture is. And you know, the French Dispatches and the Grand Budapest Hotel is all about, you know, bringing in an international idea of culture from
Yeah,
all
yeah.
over the world, and it just feels I'm hard put to think of an American filmmaker who is that open to continental European, Japanese, Indian influences.
Yeah, no, I'm inclined to agree with that, and I think, I mean, I make this point in the book, with regards to Darjeeling Limited. You know, if you read contemporary reviews of that, from 2007, especially from Indian writers, there were people who were saying, "Oh, it's a very, superficial Western view of India." And what I kind of put forth in the book is that, well, to a degree, that is a reflection of the characters, the brothers' limited understanding of the country and how they see it. And actually, if you watch their journey develop over the course of the film, their understanding and perception of their surroundings completely changes. And so, yes, you get this kind of quite, I suppose, postcardy view of the country initially. But I think it's appropriate because they're coming on this kind of spiritual journey to the place that is, synonymous with those, right? And they're bringing their baggage literally, and they kind of discard that obviously at the end of the film. And I think that symbolic moment is more, it's not just about them dealing with their grief of losing their father and everything else. It's kind of fully understanding the point of why they've come on this trip. And yeah, I think it's a shame if you kind of bandy around those sort of phrases like cultural appropriation without really interrogating that and trying to think from a storytelling point of view. The Isle of Dogs one, I don't know so much about that. I think that's I remember reading some really good criticism at the time around that, and I think I've read very compelling arguments on both sides of it, you know. And I think it's good that we have those conversations, and we always watch out for that sort of thing. But you're right. I mean, as an American filmmaker, he's made films, I think after Royal Tenenbaums, because Life Aquatic was shot outside of the US. Obviously, Darjeeling Limited. I think he's gone back there a few times, but he's made, if not set films, he's made films outside of his home country for a long time now. It's obviously his most recent film, Astro City, was largely shot in Spain, in the kind of deserts there. So yeah, I think he is a truly international filmmaker in that regard.
And that's visible in the, from the French New Wave, and Truffaut and Godard and people like that, and all the other influences that you bring up.
And I think he's also conscious of, okay, yes, he's a big fan of Truffaut and Godard and the French New Wave, but he's also conscious of the fact that they were influenced by other people, American filmmakers of the 40s, right?
Right.
And even Japanese, and like, so he's kind of, I think he's threading this needle through a lot of different film countries and movements. And I think I don't know, this, I guess it's just human nature that we tend to kind of box things up in these very neat, oh, that's the French New Wave and that sits over here, and that's, Italian neorealism and that sits over here. And actually, I think he doesn't really see things in that way. He's much more, yeah, I think he really is a kind of cultural magpie in that way. And he kind of like, in any given film, I think you have a myriad of references, and I think it's a shame in some ways. I mean, the way I've structured the book is kind of to focus, obviously, on like a film per film, right? But that there is a kind of predominant influence, I'd say, in most of his work. But as I say, you could have attacked it so many different ways, and you could have gone down the least obvious route with some of the films that you think, oh, that's obviously French. Yeah, even with Bottle Rocket. You go, oh, that's the 400 Blows. It's Truffaut, and that's kind of the approach I took in the book because it's so obvious, and I think he's such a big influence that it does merit closer inspection. But you could also look at other filmmakers and completely disregard Truffaut, and I think the same is true of a lot of his films. It's never just this one thing.
Yeah, I remember listening to the commentary track of the Criterion of Royal Tenenbaums, and there's a brilliant phrase. Gene Hackman shouts, every phrase Gene Hackman shouts is brilliant.
Yeah.
Where he says, I know you asshole, and pointing at Owen Wilson. And on the commentary track, he says, that's from Witness. You just think, okay. Harrison Ford shouts that in Witness. So
there's some great lines. I mean, there's I'm misremembering it now, but there's a line from The Last Detail. I think this is why I love Wes. So I mean, he will pick a line out, and I think because of the way he writes dialogue and the way he writes characters, it never seems out of place in his own, like coming out of Owen Wilson's mouth or whoever it is. It always just feels like, oh, that's something that character might say, even though it's a line that's being borrowed from The Last Detail or somewhere else. He's very good at kind of weaving in those I suppose those more subtle, those references that are for the purists and for the real heads.
Almost like inside jokes. It's like, no, it doesn't matter. It's not gonna change the film, you knowing this or not knowing this, but it totally makes me happy, Yeah. I wanted to ask as well, what's your relationship with Wes Anderson? Have you interviewed him in the past? Have you had an opportunity to meet him?
Do you know what? I never have done, and we as I said, Little White Lies, we've had his films on the cover over the years, and we've interviewed him, and our paths have never crossed. So it's an interesting one because a lot of people have asked me that, and I think there's this assumption when you write a book like this that you want to make sure that you have the filmmaker's blessing or have their involvement in some way, and I actually think certainly from the book I wanted to write, it benefits from not having that. Purely because this is my own kind of authored view of his work. I think if you were to get him involved or to get it more from the horse's mouth, it would be incredible, but it's a different thing. And in fact, there are some great books out there. I mean, Matt Zoller Seitz, who's a film critic who I respect a lot, and whose books on Wes are very worth reading. I mean, he's done these incredible. He's doing them like film by film now, but he's done these books that are like more interview based with Wes. And I think I'd be on a bit of a hiding to nothing if I was trying to emulate that kind of format and trying to get Wes's input on the book. So yeah, I mean, I hope that what I've kind of put forward in the book is would kind of get his blessing, but this is a kind of unauthorized view on his work, I suppose.
It's kind of liberating not to have that.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. I just like I say, it's me feeding my own curiosity, right? And I've been led by him in so many ways because I've kind of followed these breadcrumbs that he's left, and I've obviously a lot of my research was like watching director's commentary or DVD extras and reading interviews and watching old press conferences and stuff like that. So it's all there. He's kind of given me enough already. I don't think really I don't know. Also, I get the impression he is someone who doesn't like speaking at length about this stuff and giving away some of his kind of secrets and these in
Mm.
jokes and these things like that. I think it's all there if you want to go and discover it and do the kind of digging yourself. And I'm sure, I mean, as I say, this book, I really feel like I've scratched this, not even scratched the surface of it, you know. So I hope it does encourage people, inspire people to go and do a bit of their own digging.
Where do you, I mean, you said right at the beginning, you said, you think his maybe his best work is ahead of him. Are there sort of directions you could see him going in?
Well, I mean, yeah, his most recent film, Asteroid City, I think is probably my favorite of his now. That maybe that and Grand Budapest Hotel. And I didn't get to write too much about Asteroid City in the book because it was just coming out around the time that I was writing it, but I do include it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, not sure that there's a particular genre that I'd like to see him operate in more so than any others.
He's kind of invented his own genre in a way, hasn't he? I mean, I know what you mean. He doesn't make the same film twice, but
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
same time, if you watch 20 seconds of a film by Wes Anderson,
Oh,
you
100%,
instantly
yeah.
know it's a Wes
Yeah.
Anderson film, right?
Yeah, I think what I mean by that is he doesn't repeat himself in and I reeled them off earlier, but he's made films in all these different countries and the
Yeah.
settings and the types of characters, and yet the similarities, the familiarity comes from obviously the aesthetic, but the even just the way he casts actors. He has his kind of troupe, doesn't he? That he'll write a part for someone who might just like Ed Norton might appear in like a scene and
But some amazing, towering performances as well. I mean, Gene Hackman, Ray Fiennes,
yeah, yeah,
Angelica Houston. You get some real. I mean, Bill Murray, the Murray
yeah,
Renaissance came from that, from
sure, yeah.
Rushmore and Lost in Translation.
Yeah, I mean, characters, I think his films are so driven by characters, and
Yeah.
that's more so than saying, "Oh, I'd love to see him go and make a horror film or another teen romance or whatever it might be." I think seeing where he goes with characters, that's like the heart and soul of his films. And I mean, someone like you mentioned Ray Fiennes in Grand Budapest, and that character it feels criminal that that character's only ever appeared in that one film because it's like I think it's one of the best characters of this century in terms of cinematic characters. And yeah, I'd love to see him working with other actors and coming up with those kind of roles for them in whatever setting it might be. I think that's exciting. I mean, Asteroid City, the Jason Schwartzman character is interesting because you have that association with Rushmore and other films, and seeing him play a visibly older, more kind of world weary, and yet I suppose quite anxious person was yeah, very interesting. I thought that writing that role for Jason, I'm sure is there's a lot more there on a personal level for Wes
Mm.
than maybe even comes through in the film. So yeah, I think his relationship with actors is, yes, he's kind of known for casting a lot of the same people and the same faces pop up. Again, in Asteroid City, I think Scarlett Johansson is incredible in that film, and she's only in really like a few kind of really key scenes for her character, but he's just so good at working with actors and right. I mean, you can see why they all want to go back and work with him, even if it's for a day or two, because he just writes such rich characters.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, The French Dispatch is a film that hangs together almost entirely on those performances
Yeah,
as you
yeah.
go from one to the Jeffrey Wright, particularly, I think. In that.
Yeah, I'd love to see him work with I'd love to see him give a full film role to someone like Jeffrey Wright because he's obviously appeared in a few of his films now. Yeah, that would be, or like he did with Moonrise, if like discovering younger actors, breaking
Mm.
younger actors. I think that's something he's done in the past, and I just think whatever he does, there's always it's something interesting going on with the casting and with the character um, development of the characters within the film. But if you put them in the context of a kind of stable of Anderson's characters, I think he's writing more and more interesting and complex characters now.
Mm.
Um,
Sort of reminds me of the Coen brothers, just in that sense of casting and having that
yeah, yeah,
troupe, that equip, as they'd
yeah.
say. Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's a fantastic book, and I really enjoyed having it. And it's a beautiful. I was so pleased to get a copy from the because sometimes they send you a PDF and you think, oh, okay, all right, but they actually sent me a hard copy this time, so that was
Oh, that's good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that because I did make a point of saying, if we're sending out advanced copies, because I think they will be sending out digital versions as well, but it is a sort of book that you really have to sort of sit with
yeah,
and also it's not the sort of thing I can't imagine anyone's going to kind of read it cover to cover in one sitting. It's very much kind of thing that you dip in and out of, and it is quite I mean, like Wes's films, it's this kind of object art, right? I hope it's a kind of beautiful thing that people can treasure and read kind of while they're watching his films. And I'm really pleased you got to get your hands on a physical copy.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I actually have read halfway through it and then dipped into the latter half. So I have, I'm kind of on my way towards doing that
Yeah, yeah.
completely. But before I let you go, Adam, could you give me a film book recommendation for our listeners?
Yeah, do you know what? I've been a bit slack recently. I've not read that much, but the last thing I read that I really liked was a book by Anna Bogutskaya, who is a writer and programmer, someone who's written for Little White Lies quite a lot of the years, and it's called Unlikable Female Characters. I'm sure you've heard of it,
Yeah,
if you've had Anna on the show before.
she's coming on the show for Feeding the Monster, her new
Yeah,
book about horror.
yeah. So I think Feeding the Monster came out in. Is that coming out? It came out in like August.
Think it might have already come out.
I think it's
Or
just come out, but the
yeah.
the one she did, Unlikable Female Characters, I think is really good. Is a really good read.
Yeah, I put that in my top 10 for Sight and Sound asked me to do the top 10 film books last year.
Like
And
last year, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah.
and I kind of only got around to reading it sort of earlier this year, but no, I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, she's great. She's a great writer and a great yeah, her new one is really good. I'm looking forward to talking to
Yeah,
her
no, I've not read
sometime
the
in the
new one yet.
yeah,
But yeah, I
it's
look forward to that.
specifically sort of focused on horror and
Yeah,
yeah, which is a very rich vein of critical writing is going on in the field of horror at the moment.
yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, Adam.
Great. Thanks so much for having me on, John. Really appreciate it.
$1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.